Hello, welcome to the Movie Zone. Today we are recapping the story of a boxer down on his luck in the Great Depression who prevails against near impossible odds for him and his family. The movie Cinderella Man is a delight and sure to be a good watch for viewers. As usual, spoilers ahead, so be ready. Let's begin. The film starts with a black and white picture of a boxer and quickly transcends to a boxing ring in which the hit boxer is knocked out by James B. Braddock, the Bulldog of Bergen. After the fight and outside the boxing venue, James gives out autographs amidst the trumpets playing in the background. He is accompanied by his manager and friend, Joe. New York is busy. Jazz is thriving. This is the Roaring Twenties. James and Joe discuss further development regarding his boxing ability, distribute the night's earning, and proceed with words about family and kids. James is dropped off at home, greeted by May, his wife. He has a nice house and lives in a good-looking suburb neighborhood. He and his wife sit by the garden enduring booze, whilst falling into an intimate seduction, sexualizing the details of the boxing ring. A few years pass, and the United States is combating the difficulties of the Great Depression. James is having a hard time making ends meet. He now lives in a very small basement apartment with a family of 5. May mentions the pending bills, to which James tells her about a fight that night with Abe. $50, win or lose, is the payout. They are in a dire financial crisis and struggling to put food on the table, literally. James reminisces delicious memories of past meals, bringing a smile to his daughter's face, then passes her his small portion. Leaving the house, he goes to a factory where he and 100 other men wait outside in hopes the foreman will select them for a day job. He is unsuccessful and leaves. James returns home to fresh food on the table, but his young boy Jay is sitting down with May. His daughter tells him about Jay's theft, but she is shushed by May. James takes his son and returns the stolen to the butcher, telling him no matter what, we don't steal. Jay tells him how his friend's parents ran out of money in an attempt to justify his theft, but James gets the gist and reminds him of theft not being an answer. James promises Jay that he'd never send him away, as Jay falls into his father's arms and they share a warm embrace. At Mount Vernon, Joe explains the strategies James must use to get around Abe and emerge victorious. Joe finds out about James' broken hand, which is illegal in professional boxing, but James needs the money, so Joe tapes him up and continues with the fight. In the ring, Joe coaches James as best as he can as the fighters move around the ring. There is not much action, as the fighters are booed by the crowd for not putting on much of a show. Suddenly, Abe lands a good hit on James's face, who falls to the ground hard. As the round ends, James is visibly shaking and struggling to continue. James is fading and very exhausted. He leans on Abe and hits him on the side of the ribcage, shattering his hand. The referee interferes and calls off the fight as the crowd boos and boos. Joe's in the back room when Mr. Johnson enters to talk with them about the poor fight and to tell James that his license was revoked. James tries to change Johnson's mind, but is left hanging as the boxing official pushes him off. He yells at Johnson's car about his hand and how revoking his license will mean he can't collect on his purse. James gets home and tells May about his decommissioning. May tells him that if he won't be able to work while they have money to pay bills or put food on the table, she suggests sending the kids to her sister's for a while, but James denies the request and tells her they'll figure it out. He apologizes to her out of guilt, but is consoled by a warm-hearted May. There is again a big horde of workers outside the factory with vacancy for 5, and this time, James is chosen by the foreman. He meets another dock worker there, Mike. They get to talking, and when the foreman comes around to ask about the broken hand, Mike covers for James, saying it doesn't slow down their work. They speed up, and the foreman goes away. Mike and James hit it off and decide to share a drink. They discuss the family situations and where they have worked the past few months. Coming home one day, May finds a worker turning off their electricity due to a lack of payment. She pleads with the worker to keep it on for her kids, but he has kids too, and they need payment. Inside, James and May sit in candlelight, discussing the way forward with only $44.12. The road ahead is a tough one, but they have each other and the family. As they sit by the table, James refuses to pray before they eat. May and the kids collect wood from fences to keep the house warm in the winter season. As they come home, Howard is in the bed shivering with a fever. Needing a moment, May runs out of the house and breaks down. When James gets home, May tells him about Howard's fever and Rose is sneezing. James looks at the empty beds, kids not there. May tells him that boys are at her father's and Rose at her sister's. James snaps, but May tells her that he wasn't there to see the condition of the kids. He storms out of the house, with May left by the door. James goes down to the welfare office and collects some money, but it won't be enough. He gets on the ferry and goes over to New York. Once at Madison Square Garden, he talks with some high-class elite, most of them involved in the boxing world some way or another. Only having a certain amount, he asks for them to help him with the remainder amount so he can get the heat turned back on and get his kids back. The men stare at him with blank expressions, then slowly, one after another, rise to put money in his hat. Even Mr. Johnson drops in some money, but only loose change compared to everyone else. James then spots Joe and goes over, apologizing for begging while he was there. Joe dismisses his apology and helps him with the remaining amount. Finally, the kids are home and so is the electricity. But James can't seem to be in the moment. He wonders what is to come. There is a common birthday for all block kids in the community, and James' friend Mike is drunk. He is about to hit his wife, but James stops him. Mike charges, but is stopped by James. He tells him to cool off. Joe comes to the house and tells James, catch up, and he tells him that he has a fight for him, and the prize is $250. But the opponent is Corn Griffin, number 2 heavyweight contender. Joe tells James that it is not a favor, but an opportunity of necessity. They joke around and hug each other. James is finally back. Joe and James are in the locker room as Joe gives a pep talk. Then he hears something. Joe realizes James is hungry and hasn't eaten before the fight. Joe gets him food to eat, but forgets a fork, so James has to eat without hands as to not dirty his gloves. As he begins to eat his food, a reporter enters and asks James about his boxing skills in relation to an old article. Mike is told by his dock workers about James's fight on the radio, and they listen in with excitement. In the ring, the fighters are being introduced. James looks at Griffin with a smirk as the fight begins. Things pick up right away as Griffin smashes James mercilessly, holding nothing back. Joe tells James to get out of Griffin's hold and fight back. Joe gives advice, and suddenly, James lands some good punches on Griffin. He's got a really killer jab, something he's picked up at the docks by having to use his non-dominant hand. Braddock smashes Griffin's face, and the two exchange shots. As the third round begins, James avoids shots and hits Griffin hard, who goes down. He comes after Griffin with the punches and finally knocks him out, much to the surprise of the crowd and Joe. Everyone goes wild as James wins. Those at the bar, friends at the bar, and his family. As Joe and James talk in the back room, the press storms in, and James is photographed. At the World Heavyweight Championship, Max Bauer brutalizes his opponent. James looks at the game from the sidelines. He returns home in a mask of silence, radiating disappointment, only to flip a moment later and show the family the money he won. James tells May that the license wasn't reinstated, and it was only one fight. James gets back at the factory again, and this time, the foreman asks him about the fight, respecting the big win. Mike and James catch up, as Mike apologizes for his drunkenness at the kids' party. James tells May it might be possible he gets his boxing license back and gives her $175 he received for training. May isn't sure, as she fears the injuries James might sustain. However, she is convinced by her husband. May gets to Joe and tells him that she won't allow Joe to let her husband fight. Joe invites her to tea and puts forth his belief in James and tries to get May on the same page. But his wife insists on woman-to-woman conversation to set the tone. She succeeds. Joe gets to Johnson and pitches James' reinstatement for boxing. So Joe asks for a fight with Lewis. James fought his last legit fight against Lewis, after which he was decommissioned. Johnson agrees to the wager. Joe informs James about the fight as they cheer. He explains what's at stake here is his career in the ring. Mike insinuates his possibility of getting loaded if James wins. James talks to May and leaves for the fight. In the ring, the fighters engage. Round 1 ends with both fighters getting advice from their managers in the form of a pep talk. James gets the upper hand and pins out Lewis as the crowd roars. Lewis is able to get up, but James takes him out. We flash to another fight with James in the ring with Art Latsky. They jab at each other, but James gets the upper hand and easily finishes his opponent and declares the winner. Later, Maxie is approached by his manager while he is among some lady company, and he tells him about the recent fight. Maxie shuts him off and pushes him out of the room. James comes back home with flowers in his hands. Sarah is also present. She reveals that Mike has been missing for 3 days after he was fired at the factory. James takes a trip down Hooverville in search of Mike. He yells his name in the streets, damned by the silence of hysteria. Hooverville is on fire as James finds Mike and comforts him. Some emergency personnel arrive to help Mike, but it's no use, and he passes away moments later. James and May are among the press at a conference. James expresses his gratitude for anything he ever had and the chance to fight in the ring again. A reporter tells May how Maxie killed 2 people in the ring. James covers for his wife, but we can see the fear building inside her and showing through her eyes. Johnson briefs James about the consequences of the fight to exonerate himself if any mishap should happen. Johnson shows James the previous fighters who died in the ring. Joe resists watching the brutality, but James insists on re-watching as he studies the technique and attitude of his opponent. When Joe and James join their wives for dinner, Joe spots his name in the paper and their Cinderella story. Maxie enters the dining hall and locks eyes with James. Maxie presents a bottle and good wishes to James. James gets up to greet Maxie, but is threatened to not take the fight. After talking with James, Maxie turns to May and warns her of her husband's impending death. Outraged, May throws champagne at Maxie's face after the obscenity she witnessed. Next day, James and Jay are exchanging boxing lessons when May snaps. Flustered from fear, James walks up to comfort her. May tells him about her fears of losing him in the fight, and the two enter an argument. She warns him she won't stand for it and says he must give up the fight at all costs. The day of the fight is upon them, with James under the weather as the press arrives. The family escorts James to the car among the gaze of the neighbors. James kisses May and the kids goodbye, then departs. Needing some time to herself, May drops her kids at her sister's and leaves for church. There, she finds a horde of people already praying for James and his victory. The priest tells May the perception those people had for James's fight and how they see him fighting for them. May enters the gym as she sees James warming up. They talk, and May gives her blessing for the fight to continue. James tells her to go home as they joke around. May breaks down and insists that she needs to see James coming home. James enters the ring to see the arena. Contrary to its normal, it goes quiet. Maxie enters the ring, and the complex explodes with excitement. Round 1 begins, with James smashing Maxie's head as the crowd cheers. In the round 2, both of them ushering each other as the round ends on an even. However, James has a hurt rib. Round 5 begins with James ducks power punches, sending the crowd into laughter. Maxie indulges in malpractice and sledging about James's wife. Maxie is booed by the crowd, but James fights back and manages to resist. In round 7, Maxie charges with full force, with the killer instinct in him, and he gets James to almost a concussion as he overpowers him. However, James manages to come back and hit the face on Maxie, and quite evidently, Maxie is seen losing it in the mind. At Alice's house, the boys try to get their mom to allow them to listen to the fight on the radio. James, defying the odds, survives round 11 and returns to the ring pumped up and gives Maxie the pain as he enters the zone, and the crowd chant echoes, "Braddock! Braddock!" Maxie gives James a low blow, and Joe loses his cool at this another incident of malpractice. Joe comforts James, while Maxie's manager boosts the ego on him by belittling James. Final round begins. Max hits James hard, but not so later. James fights back. However, he receives the sucker punch and hits the ropes. The crowd stood up and gasped. James sees a blurry Maxie walking onto him, coupled with visions of his last concussion, as he manages to escape the onslaught, and the crowd breaks boundaries and hits the ring boundaries. James gives it to him the hard way. The fight ends with cheering all along as May breathes a sigh of relief. However, the result is delayed. and Joe's suspicion over favoritism arises. After much suspense, James is declared the winner. The crowd goes gaga. The church community rejoices. May breaks down, and there are cheers all around. The Cinderella Man is declared the new World Heavyweight Champion. What do you think of the Iron Chin James J. Braddock? A great story of a man making his own during a difficult time of American history. Tell us what you think. See you next time.